Hey everyone, I'm John Lind, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And our guest today is Sanjeev Shetty. He's president and COO at DBSync. Welcome, Sanjeev.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, excited for our discussion. Before we dive into our topics, tell us a little bit about yourself and DBSync.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sanjeev Shetty, President and CEO of DBSync. My focus really has been in the healthcare vertical of DBSync. I come from the senior living background, so spent 5 years consulting on the provider side and also working, for a technology-based company providing solutions to that sector. And prior to that, most of my career has been in the telecommunications sector for 19 years. So that's a little bit about myself. DBSync, think of us as a UPS of data, John. We
Interesting.
simply transfer data from one application to another. We have two main product lines. We have something called cloud workflow. So think of that as sort of your point-to-point application integrations and automation. And then we have cloud replication, which is sort of the data ops and the data warehousing side of our business. So it allows you to take, a database such as Salesforce and replicate it into a data lake instance for things like AI, ML, and so on.
Yeah. Well, and we met at the PointClickCare user conference. So, I think we want to get to that eventually. But before we go into there, what's interesting about DBSync is you've connected so many platforms, even outside of healthcare. So talk to me about, data access and sharing. Is it really a healthcare problem? We hear all about it. It's complicated, et cetera. Or how do you see this in other industries? Is it a problem in other industries as well?
Absolutely, John. That's a great question. Before I jump into answering that question, there are a couple of things that we have to realize as an industry. If you look at the use of SaaS applications over the last, let's say, 7 years, 2015, an average organization may have had like 8 applications that they use. Now it's like 110. So the use of SaaS application has grown over tenfold. The other backdrop that we're facing, John, and you probably know this best, is that we have a labor shortage. So 20% of the industry post-pandemic left the industry. The demand for healthcare workers, far surpasses the supply. I think I read a stat that, by 2030, there's going to be a need for 10 million healthcare workers. And if you look at, the average time spent by a clinician or a healthcare worker on mundane, repetitive data keying kind of tasks, it's like 20-30% of their day. And no one really wants to do that. So that's where we come in. And this problem isn't specific to healthcare. I mean, I worked in, at least 3 other verticals, and, it was the same challenge. The only difference is back then, you had to sort of do those point-to-point costly integrations that, took time. And, here we are, fast forward, 7-8 years, and we've templatized the whole process of integration with no code applications, and we've made it real simple. But to go back to your question, if you look at any industry, let's say you have an industry like e-commerce, they want to sync their omni-channel orders and fulfillment data across their CRM and ERP and accounting systems, so that they can have a better streamlined process. Any other industry using a CRM like Salesforce will want their orders and their accounting invoices, be uploaded into their accounting systems so that they have, a streamlined process in their order to pay process or their procure to pay process. And, the use cases differ. I mean, if you look at healthcare, for instance, the whole process of ADT, as they call it, or admissions, discharge, and transfer, is really clunky. And also the movement of demographic information isn't that easy. So I think this problem occurs in every industry. It's just that the use case and the pain point is slightly different every time you go to a different vertical.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right about the workforce issues. I often hear of health systems, hospital organizations that are like, sure, we can do that integration, give us 6 months or a year. And you're like, wait, that ruins the whole project. So talk about your experience. How many different softwares and systems have you connected to the DBSync data management platform? And then talk maybe a little, how easy is it to connect the data?
Yeah, great question, John. So we've connected to about 40 different applications, whether that be in CRM or ERP or accounting software or e-commerce platforms. And we pick the larger ones typically because that's where most of the use cases are and more usage lies. But in terms of simplicity of using our platform, we kind of went with, the book Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. And we really want companies and organizations and technical departments to be up and running quickly. Because there's nothing worse than saying, hey, it's going to take 6 months and, it's some 5-figure number to make this integration work. We come in and we do it quick, usually within 2 weeks if it's a standard connector. And, we make it real simple for you to use it. So our new UI is highly simplified so a non-technical person can use it. I always equate it to, hey, if my 13-year-old son can use it, anyone can use it. So, we make it simple. We also have set up a wizard so you can literally be up and running with a few clicks. So you don't have to have a lot of hand-holding in the implementation process.
Interesting. So talk about how you approach reading versus writing. Is this pure reading into the data lake, or are you doing writing back to applications as well?
We actually do both. The read and write process when it comes to integration is slightly different and they have different commands. But the first thing, actually there's 2 things. One is, the platform has to expose their APIs for us to be able to use and ingest that
The
data.
biggest problem in healthcare, they don't.
Exactly. And then the second problem is we have to adhere to some architectural standards. So the one that we use is, for example, is called REST. And once you have those 2 in place, then you've got, your get commands for read, and then you got, your post, delete, and put commands when you want to write. And typically when it comes to writing data into, for example, like an EHR system, there may be some checks and balances. You may not just want to write data into that database. You may want a clinician to actually verify and validate the data before it gets written. And usually that's what we see when we write to databases, but we do it both. We read and write. And we also move data from various different databases in both directions.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the specific areas you're working in with healthcare in particular. I mentioned that we met at the PointClickCare event. So maybe you could start with that. What are some of your healthcare specific use cases for sharing data?
Yeah, so the most common one that we find when we talk to senior living operators and healthcare in general is, the movement of demographic information. So a good example of that would be, I come in and my emergency contacts has changed.
Mm-hmm.
I want that reflected, in my CRM system. So moving that data from your EHR system to your CRM would be a typical use case. But if you look at it going the other way, you may have, a person who's, waiting to get an assessment done, and, that pre-assessment flag needs to be sent over to the EHR pending the assessment. And that may be a piece of data that you move the other way going back into the EHR. So, the use cases are slightly different, everyone we talk to, but I would say in general, the transfer of demographic information and patient status seems to be the most common use case, as people want to try and track what they call as the patient journey, through the continuum of care. And we all know that, as they move through the continuum of care, the data doesn't necessarily move with them. And that's where DBSync comes in, because we can actually help transition that data as they move through the continuum of care. So, the left hand is talking to the right hand, and, the data is everywhere that it needs to be in almost real time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see even Epic launching their own CRM. CRMs are all the rage in healthcare right now. And how do we track that patient journey? So transferring the demographics to make sure that you're reaching out to them appropriately is, I think it's an underestimated value that people don't understand the importance of understanding the right demographic and contact information. So that's great. Where do you see some other possible areas of growth for DBSync, in healthcare in particular?
I think the biggest area is, in the ADT process. Right now, if you look at a senior living operator, it could take them anywhere from 24 to 48 hours to admit or discharge a patient, just simply because certain processes haven't changed in that industry. Typical emails, faxes come in, someone has to put it into some sort of a hospitality system, and then it goes into, an EHR system. And from there, it may go to, 6 or 8 different databases, whether it's engagement or dining or, maintenance. And we basically take that 24 to 48 hour process and we distill it down to minutes. So think about the time saved and the time that we can give back to that clinician or non-clinician working on this process. It's huge. The other area that we're seeing a lot of demand in is this concept of MarTech, or marketing technology. So if you think about one of our other platforms, like we called it Cloud Replication, you're now able to take all these data from these different databases and put it into a data lake. We actually use Azure to bring all of this together. And we use a product called Synapse. So you can now start, mining this data and getting more of a 360 view of your patient from all these different data sources. So that's also an area that we're seeing a lot of demand in and also growth in.
Nice. Well, Sanjeev, this has been really educational. It's great to feature DBSync here on Healthcare IT Today. So thanks so much for taking the time. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out, healthcareittoday.com, or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcast application. Thanks, Sanjeev.
Thank you, John.